Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the English Globe. We are so happy to have you here today for another fascinating episode where we explore world events and learn English together. If this is your first time joining us, thank you for being part of our global learning community. Every week, we bring you interesting discussions about politics, history, and current affairs in simple and clear English. Our goal is to help you understand how the world works while improving your vocabulary, listening, and comprehension skills.
That's right, Adam. Today's topic is one that's making headlines across the world. Trump challenges China at the ASEAN Summit, a turning point in Asia. It's a story that combines international politics, diplomacy, and global economics, three areas that shape our modern world. We'll explore what exactly happened at the ASEAN Summit, what kind of message former US President Donald Trump sent to China, and why this event is being seen by some analysts as a key moment in Asian geopolitics.
Now, before we dive deep into this fascinating topic, we'd like to take a moment to thank our wonderful listeners from all around the world. Every week, we see your kind comments, and it truly inspires us to keep creating educational content for you. If you enjoy learning English through real-world stories, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to the English Globe, and turn on the notification bell. It helps us grow and reach more learners like you.
And we'd love to hear from you too. Please tell us in the comments where you are listening from. Maybe you're in Indonesia, India, Afghanistan, the Philippines, or perhaps somewhere in Europe or Africa. We want to know where our community is growing. Also, share your opinion about today's topic. What do you think about the challenges between the United States and China? Do you think the world is moving toward a new balance of power in Asia? Your ideas make this channel more interactive and inspiring for everyone.
Exactly, Julia. Our goal here is not to take sides or support any political agenda, but to explain what's happening in the world in a fair, neutral, and educational way. Today's topic is important because it helps us understand how major global powers interact and how their actions influence smaller nations in Asia and beyond. It's also a perfect example of how language, diplomacy, and communication shape international relations. By listening carefully, you will also learn many new English words and expressions that are often used in global news and discussions.
Let's start by understanding why the ASEAN Summit is such a big deal. ASEAN stands for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It's a regional organization that includes countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, and several others. The purpose of ASEAN is to promote cooperation, peace, and economic growth across Asia. Each year, its summit brings together world leaders to talk about trade, regional security, environmental challenges, and development goals. It's one of the most important diplomatic gatherings in Asia.
And this year's summit was particularly significant because former US President Donald Trump took a strong position when addressing China's growing influence in the region. He emphasized fair trade, economic independence, and respect for international rules. His words sparked a wave of discussions, not just about US-China relations, but also about what this could mean for Asia's future. Many experts and journalists described his statements as a major diplomatic challenge to China, raising questions about whether this could mark a new turning point in Asia's political balance.
Now, before we go into the details, let's pause for a moment and think about why this topic matters to us as English learners. When we talk about global events like this, we don't just learn facts. We also learn how people communicate ideas, express opinions, and debate respectfully. The language of diplomacy is powerful. Leaders often use polite but firm expressions to deliver messages that can influence global politics. Understanding this language helps us become better communicators and more aware global citizens.
Absolutely, Julia. And I want to remind our listeners that learning English through real events like the ASEAN Summit is one of the best ways to expand your knowledge. You get to practice listening, learn new vocabulary, and understand how English is used in international news, politics, and business. Even if the topic seems complex at first, don't worry. We're going to explain everything step by step in simple language, so you can follow along easily.
So, dear listeners, make sure you stay with us until the end of this episode. By the time we finish, you'll have a clearer understanding of what happened at the ASEAN Summit, why Trump's message to China was significant, and what this event could mean for Asia and the world. You'll also gain valuable vocabulary and expressions you can use when talking about international issues in English.
And once again, please remember to like this video, subscribe to the English Globe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what you think about today's topic. Is this summit a turning point for Asia, or is it simply another round of diplomatic talk between world powers? We'll be reading your opinions and might even mention some of them in future episodes. Your participation makes this podcast a global classroom where everyone learns together.
In the next part of our discussion, we'll explore what ASEAN really is and why it plays such an important role in the balance between East and West. But for now, take a deep breath, stay comfortable, and get ready to dive into the fascinating world of international relations in clear, simple English.
This is going to be an exciting journey through politics, language, and global affairs. So, dear listeners, let's get started with understanding ASEAN, the stage where this new chapter of international diplomacy is unfolding.
Before we talk about Trump's challenge to China, it's very important to understand what ASEAN actually is, because this organization is the main platform where all of these discussions happen. ASEAN stands for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and it was officially established on August 8, 1967. The founding members were Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand. These 5 countries came together with a shared vision to promote peace, stability, and economic cooperation in their region after many years of political and social changes in Asia.
That's right, Julia. When ASEAN was created, Southeast Asia was still facing many challenges: wars, colonial history, poverty, and the struggle to build independent economies. The leaders of these nations realized that they could achieve much more together than alone. Their goal was to build trust between neighbors, avoid conflicts, and create a stronger voice for their region in world affairs. Over time, ASEAN grew to include 10 members, with Brunei, Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, and Cambodia joining later. Together, these 10 nations represent more than 600 million people, nearly 1/10 of the world's population.
That's a massive population, and it shows how important ASEAN is on the global stage. But ASEAN is not only about population, it's also about trade, security, and diplomacy. The organization has built a unique way of working, known as the ASEAN way. This idea focuses on respect for national sovereignty, non-interference in domestic affairs, and consensus-based decision-making. In simple English, it means that ASEAN countries try to solve problems through discussion and mutual understanding, without forcing one country's views on another.
This is what makes ASEAN so special, because unlike many other organizations that use voting or majority power, ASEAN believes in slow but steady progress through dialogue and agreement. It's a very Asian approach to diplomacy: calm, respectful, and cooperative. However, it also means that decision-making can sometimes be slow because everyone's opinion must be considered before any final decision is made. But this method has kept the region largely peaceful for decades, even when global tensions were rising in other parts of the world.
Another reason why ASEAN matters so much is its geographical position. If you look at a map, you'll notice that Southeast Asia sits right between the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean. It's a bridge between East Asia, South Asia, and the rest of the world. Many of the world's busiest trade routes pass through this region, especially the South China Sea, which is one of the most important waterways for global trade. This makes ASEAN not just a regional organization, but a key player in the world's economy and security system.
Yes, and that's why major global powers, like the United States, China, Japan, and even the European Union, pay very close attention to ASEAN. They all want to build good relations with its member states because these countries control important markets, natural resources, and sea routes. For example, Singapore is a major global financial hub, Indonesia is rich in natural resources, and Vietnam is becoming a manufacturing powerhouse. The diversity of ASEAN is its strength, but it also brings challenges because not all members share the same level of economic development or political systems.
That's true, and that's exactly why diplomacy within ASEAN can be complex. Some countries are more democratic, while others have different systems of governance. Some are rich, and others are still developing. But despite these differences, they all agree on one key principle: maintaining peace and stability in the region. This shared goal allows them to cooperate even when their national interests are different. It also makes ASEAN a place where dialogue between world powers can happen safely and productively.
Let's talk about ASEAN's meetings for a moment. Every year, leaders from all member countries come together for the ASEAN Summit. This is the most important event in the organization's calendar. It's not only attended by the 10 ASEAN leaders, but also by representatives from partner nations like the United States, China, Japan, India, Australia, and the European Union. These partner meetings are known as the ASEAN Plus frameworks, and they are designed to promote wider cooperation across the Asia-Pacific region.
Exactly. And this year's summit became especially important because it served as a stage for a very public diplomatic interaction between the United States and China. When Trump attended the summit, he used his speech to express strong views about trade fairness and regional stability. The presence of China's representatives made the moment even more intense. Many journalists and analysts described it as a diplomatic test, one that could shape the direction of US-China relations and influence how ASEAN countries align themselves in the future.
But ASEAN's main role is not to take sides. It's to maintain neutrality and encourage open dialogue between powerful nations. That's why the organization often acts as a mediator, a bridge that connects different viewpoints. It allows major powers to discuss their disagreements in a peaceful setting. This is one of the reasons the ASEAN Summit is so respected in the world. It's not just a meeting. It's a space for negotiation, cooperation, and understanding among diverse nations.
And for our English learners, this is a great opportunity to learn the language of diplomacy. In diplomatic conversations, you often hear phrases like mutual understanding, shared goals, regional stability, and economic cooperation. These words are carefully chosen to express ideas politely and respectfully, even when there are disagreements. Diplomacy is all about tone, choice of words, and balance. Learning this style of English can help you communicate more effectively in global discussions, international business, or academic debates.
Exactly, Julia. Understanding how leaders speak at events like the ASEAN Summit can help learners improve not only their English skills, but also their cultural awareness. For example, when leaders say things like, "We hope to strengthen our partnership," it's a polite way of saying they want to build closer ties. When they say, "We recognize the challenges ahead," it often means they know there are disagreements but want to stay diplomatic. These expressions are essential in professional and political communication.
So when we talk about ASEAN, we're not just talking about politics. We're talking about a community that represents the spirit of cooperation and peaceful problem-solving. It's a region that connects some of the fastest-growing economies in the world, and it serves as a voice for developing nations in global decision-making. ASEAN shows how countries with different languages, religions, and political systems can still work together for a common purpose: peace and prosperity.
And that's exactly why Trump's message to China at the ASEAN Summit became such a big topic. The summit is a stage where every word matters. where tone and language are just as important as policy. When a leader like Trump challenges another major power, it doesn't just affect two countries. It can influence the entire region's strategy, economy, and diplomacy. That's why this event has drawn global attention, and why we're discussing it today on the English Globe.
In our next section, we'll look at the historical context behind US-China relations in Asia. We'll explain how the two nations built their influence in the region over time and what led to the current competition for power. Understanding history is key to understanding today's politics, and it will also help you see how the language of diplomacy has evolved over the years.
So, dear listeners, stay with us as we go deeper into the story behind the summit. And if you're enjoying this episode, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the English Globe, and tell us in the comments which ASEAN country you find most interesting and why. We love reading your thoughts and learning together with you. Now, let's continue our journey into history and discover how the US and China's paths in Asia became so deeply connected. Before we can really understand what happened at the ASEAN Summit and why it is so important, we need to take a step back in time. The relationship between the United States and China is one of the most complex and influential relationships in the world. It has shaped not only global politics, but also trade, technology, and diplomacy. To fully appreciate Trump's recent challenge to China, we must understand how this relationship began, how it evolved, and why Asia has become the central stage for their competition.
That's very true, Adam. The story of US-China relations goes back over 200 years, but modern diplomatic relations really began after World War II. At that time, China was undergoing huge political changes, and the US was emerging as a global superpower. During the Cold War, which started in the late 1940s, the world was divided between two major powers, the United States and the Soviet Union. China, after its revolution in 1949, joined the communist side under the leadership of Mao Zedong, while the US led the capitalist and democratic bloc.
For many years, there was almost no direct contact between Washington and Beijing. The two countries were separated by ideology, politics, and military alliances. But something remarkable happened in the early 1970s. In 1972, U.S. President Richard Nixon made a historic visit to China. This visit marked the beginning of a new era. It was the first time an American president had ever visited the People's Republic of China. It opened the door for diplomatic relations and started a long process of engagement between the two nations.
That's right. Nixon's visit was a turning point. It showed that even countries with very different systems could find common ground through diplomacy. The US saw China as a potential partner to balance against the Soviet Union, while China saw an opportunity to open up to the world and modernize its economy. This cooperation gradually led to China's reintegration into the international community. By 1979, the US and China officially established diplomatic relations, and trade between them began to grow rapidly.
Over the next few decades, China's economy transformed in ways that the world had never seen before. The country opened its markets, welcomed foreign investment, and became a major manufacturing center for global goods. American companies began to build factories and trade heavily with China. This economic partnership brought great benefits to both sides. American consumers enjoyed cheaper products, and China experienced incredible economic growth, lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty.
Yes, but as China's power and confidence grew, so did competition. By the early 2000s, China had become the world's second-largest economy, right after the United States. It also began expanding its influence in Asia and beyond. At the same time, the US was deeply involved in wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which shifted its attention away from Asia for a while. But when the Obama administration came into power, it launched what was called the Pivot to Asia strategy. This policy aimed to strengthen America's presence in the region both economically and militarily, to balance China's rise.
That strategy marked the beginning of a new chapter in U.S.-China relations, one that was defined by both cooperation and competition. The two countries continued trading and collaborating on global issues like climate change, but they also began to disagree more strongly on issues like the South China Sea, cybersecurity, and technology. The South China Sea became especially important because it's one of the busiest trade routes in the world, and several countries, including China, Vietnam, and the Philippines, claim parts of it. The U.S., which supports freedom of navigation, often challenges China's activities there.
Exactly, Adam. For many Asian nations, this competition between the US and China created both challenges and opportunities. Countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, and Malaysia had to balance their relationships carefully. They wanted strong economic ties with China because of trade, but they also valued the US as a security partner. This is why ASEAN became such an important organization. It allowed these nations to maintain neutrality while benefiting from cooperation with both major powers.
Now, when we look at more recent years, things became even more intense during the Trump administration. President Donald Trump took a very different approach from his predecessors. He was outspoken, direct, and willing to use tariffs and trade restrictions to pressure China. His administration accused China of unfair trade practices, intellectual property theft, and manipulating the global market. These claims led to a period widely known as the trade war, where both sides imposed tariffs on each other's goods, affecting billions of dollars in trade.
The trade war had major global consequences. It affected not only the US and China, but also other countries that were part of the global supply chain. Many businesses had to rethink where they produced their products. Some companies moved manufacturing from China to countries like Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia, all ASEAN members. This shift showed how deeply the economies of Asia are connected and how actions between two superpowers can influence the entire region's growth.
That's an excellent point. It's also important to mention that while the trade war created tensions, it also made ASEAN even more relevant. As companies looked for alternatives to China, Southeast Asia became a more attractive region for investment. ASEAN countries started receiving more attention from global businesses and investors who wanted stability and lower production costs. In this way, competition between the US and China indirectly strengthened ASEAN's position in global trade and diplomacy.
So, when Trump appeared at the ASEAN Summit and made strong statements about fair trade and regional cooperation, it was part of a bigger picture that had been building for decades. His message wasn't just about one summit. It was about reshaping global relationships and reducing America's economic dependence on China. Whether you agree or disagree with his methods, there's no denying that his approach forced the world to look at the balance of power in Asia more carefully than before.
And that's what makes this story so fascinating for English learners and global citizens alike. It shows how international relations are built over time, through history, negotiation, and communication. It also teaches us how powerful language can be in diplomacy. Words, tone, and timing can influence relationships between nations, just as they influence personal communication in everyday life. Understanding this helps us become better speakers, listeners, and global thinkers.
Well said, Adam. In our next section, we'll look closely at Trump's presence at the ASEAN Summit and what exactly he said that caused such a strong reaction from China and other countries. We'll explore how leaders communicate their national interests in public settings and how their speeches are carefully crafted to send messages not only to other leaders, but also to the entire world.
That's going to be a fascinating part of our discussion, Julia. So, dear listeners, if you're enjoying this podcast, please don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to the English Globe, and tell us in the comments what you think about the history between the US and China. Do you think cooperation is still possible, or are we entering a new era of rivalry? We'd love to hear your opinions. Now let's move forward and explore how Trump's statements at the ASEAN Summit made global headlines and shaped the diplomatic conversation across Asia. Now that we've explored the long history of U.S.-China relations, it's time to focus on one of the most talked-about moments in recent diplomacy, former President Donald Trump's appearance at the ASEAN Summit. His presence was not just symbolic, it represented a message, a statement, and a new direction in how the United States approached its relationships in Asia. Trump's attendance reminded the world that Washington still considered the Indo-Pacific region vital to its national interests. But what truly caught attention was not only that he showed up, it was what he said, how he said it, and the impact it had on the countries listening in that room.
That's right, Adam. When Trump arrived at the ASEAN Summit, the global media followed every step. He walked into a hall filled with world leaders, presidents, prime ministers, and ministers from across Southeast Asia, along with high-level representatives from China, Japan, and India. The event was held under bright lights and surrounded by the symbols of unity, cooperation, and peace. Yet, behind the warm handshakes and smiling photographs, there was a very serious atmosphere. Everyone knew that Trump's speech could shape not just the tone of the summit, but the region's direction for years to come.
Exactly. When Trump began his address, his words were clear, direct, and filled with strong language about fairness and sovereignty. He emphasized that every nation had the right to protect its own economic interests, and that the U.S. would no longer tolerate trade practices that it considered unfair or manipulative. While he didn't mention China by name in every sentence, it was very clear to everyone in the room which country he was referring to. He talked about how open markets must be truly open, not controlled or dominated by one power.
The message was unmistakable. Trump challenged what he described as unbalanced trade and called for reciprocal respect in global economic relations. He spoke about transparency, accountability, and independence. In diplomatic language, these words carry deep meaning. When a leader says transparency, they are often asking for honesty in trade practices. When they say reciprocal, they are asking for fairness, meaning both sides should benefit equally. His speech mixed the language of business with the tone of a political leader who wanted to redefine international rules.
And it's worth noting that Trump's style was very different from traditional American diplomacy. Past presidents usually focused on building quiet consensus behind the scenes, using softer expressions and subtle negotiation. Trump preferred to speak openly, directly to the audience and the media. His speeches were designed not only for diplomats, but also for people watching around the world. This approach made his messages stronger and more memorable, but it also made them more controversial because his words were sometimes seen as confrontational rather than cooperative.
Yes, and for many ASEAN leaders sitting in that room, it was a moment of both curiosity and caution. On one hand, some countries appreciated that Trump was taking a firm stance on issues like fair trade and economic sovereignty. They felt that smaller nations often struggled in a system dominated by larger powers, and hearing the US support fairness sounded appealing. On the other hand, other countries worried that Trump's sharp words might increase tensions with China, their largest trading partner. Many ASEAN members depend heavily on Chinese investment and exports, so they prefer a calm balance rather than confrontation.
Exactly. This delicate balance is what makes ASEAN diplomacy so fascinating. Each nation must think carefully before reacting to global powers. For example, countries like Vietnam and the Philippines have territorial disputes with China in the South China Sea, so they quietly welcomed stronger U.S. involvement. Meanwhile, others like Cambodia or Laos, which have close economic ties with Beijing, preferred to avoid any public criticism of China. So, while Trump's message was bold, ASEAN leaders responded with polite statements emphasizing peace, cooperation, and continued dialogue.
And that's where the art of diplomacy truly shows itself. Even when leaders disagree, they often use very soft and respectful language. Instead of saying, "We reject your view," they might say, "We believe a different approach could be more constructive." Instead of saying, "Kasi, you are wrong," they might say, "We have noted your concerns and will continue discussions." These diplomatic phrases allow countries to express disagreement without damaging relationships. For English learners, this is a valuable lesson in polite communication. How to stay firm, yet respectful in your speech.
Absolutely. Trump's speech at the ASEAN Summit also gave us a chance to observe how body language plays a role in diplomacy. Cameras captured every detail, the expressions of leaders, the reactions of delegates, and even the silent exchanges between officials. In such meetings, communication is not only about words, but also about tone, posture, and timing. When a leader pauses, smiles, or looks directly at another delegate, it can send a strong signal. Trump's confident, assertive manner communicated strength and determination, while others in the room chose to respond with calm smiles and careful applause.
That's a wonderful observation, Adam. Another key point from Trump's appearance was his emphasis on America first. This phrase, which he used often during his presidency, meant that his government's top priority was protecting US workers, industries, and economic interests. However, in international settings like ASEAN, this slogan carried mixed feelings. Some leaders admired his clarity and commitment to national priorities, while others worried that it suggested a retreat from international cooperation. The challenge was to interpret his message. Was the US stepping back from Asia or simply asking for fairer relationships?
That question remains one of the biggest discussions among political analysts even today. Trump's speech reminded everyone that global leadership is not just about power, it's also about trust and communication. The words used in that room would later influence markets, trade policies, and even diplomatic strategies across Asia. China, of course, listened carefully. Though Chinese officials remained composed, their later statements emphasized cooperation, multilateralism, and shared growth, a diplomatic way of saying they preferred a less confrontational path.
Yes, and it's interesting to see how both sides use language to shape their image. Trump used strong, direct vocabulary. Words like fairness, independence, and strength China, on the other hand, often responds with words like harmony, mutual benefit, and long-term partnership. These are more emotional and inclusive phrases. For English learners, this contrast shows how vocabulary can reflect cultural differences. Western diplomacy often values directness, while Asian diplomacy tends to prefer balance and subtlety. Neither is better. They're just different styles that express the same desire for influence and respect.
And that's one of the main reasons why the ASEAN Summit was the perfect setting for this exchange. ASEAN provides a neutral platform where both global powers can present their views without direct confrontation. The leaders of Southeast Asia act like skilled mediators, listening carefully, encouraging dialogue, and avoiding taking sides. This makes the summit not just a political event, but a classroom of diplomacy, where every speech becomes a lesson in international communication.
For English learners listening today, there's something important to remember. Diplomacy is not about using difficult words. It's about using careful words. It's about expressing disagreement politely, showing confidence without arrogance, and finding common ground even in tough discussions. When Trump spoke at the ASEAN Summit, whether you agree with his policies or not, his choice of tone and timing demonstrated how language can become a tool of power. The same principle applies in daily life, in school, in business, or in personal relationships.
Exactly, Julia. Every conversation is a negotiation in some way. When you talk to someone, you are sharing your perspective while trying to understand theirs. That's what makes communication powerful. In the next section of our podcast, we will look closely at how China responded to Trump's remarks and how ASEAN countries reacted afterward. You'll see how the language of diplomacy continues, calm, measured, and strategic, even when disagreements exist behind the scenes.
So, dear listeners, if you're enjoying this educational journey through global events, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the English Globe, and leave us a comment. Tell us what you think about Trump's speech style. Do you think being direct is more effective in diplomacy, or do you prefer the softer, polite style often used in Asian politics? We love hearing your opinions and experiences. Now, let's move forward and explore how China and the rest of Asia responded to these powerful words at the ASEAN Summit. After President Trump's powerful speech at the ASEAN Summit, all eyes turned toward China. The world wanted to see how Beijing would respond to the new tone coming from Washington. China's diplomats are known for being very careful, calm, and strategic. They never react quickly or emotionally. Instead, they usually take their time to send a message that is balanced, thoughtful, and full of indirect meaning. And this time was no different.
That's right, Julia. China's first reaction was not through a speech, but through behavior, through how its officials spoke at press conferences, how they interacted with ASEAN leaders, and even through the kind of language they used in their official statements. In diplomacy, words are like signals. When China said it welcomed cooperation but opposed interference, it was quietly sending a message. Cooperation meant that China wanted peaceful relations, but interference hinted that it did not appreciate other countries, especially the United States, getting involved in what it considered regional matters.
Exactly. The Chinese government wanted to show that it was open to partnership but firm in protecting its sovereignty. In fact, one of the most common phrases used by Chinese officials is mutual respect. This phrase appears again and again in Chinese diplomacy. It means that all countries, big or small, should be treated equally, and that no nation should try to control another. While the US spoke of fairness and independence, China emphasized harmony and respect. The difference in language shows the difference in worldview. America prefers direct words about power and competition. China prefers soft words about peace and balance.
For English learners, these differences are fascinating because they show how political vocabulary reflects national culture. For example, when Chinese leaders use the word win-win cooperation, it means both sides should gain something. When American leaders use strategic interests, it usually means protecting national priorities first. So, when diplomats communicate, they don't only exchange information, they also express cultural values and political goals through words.
That's a great point, Adam. And after Trump's remarks, China's state media began publishing articles and editorials emphasizing that the Asia-Pacific region should not be a place for rivalry, but for shared growth. They said that China's rise was not a threat, but an opportunity. They highlighted infrastructure projects, trade routes, and investment plans under the Belt and Road Initiative. This was Beijing's way of reminding ASEAN countries that China is not only their neighbor, but also one of their biggest economic partners. It wanted to assure them that cooperation brings prosperity, while confrontation brings uncertainty.
Exactly. But at the same time, some ASEAN countries were not entirely convinced. They appreciated China's economic power, its investments, factories, and infrastructure projects, but they also worried about becoming too dependent. That's where the concept of policy balance becomes important. Policy balance means trying to maintain good relations with both major powers, the US and China, without taking sides. This is one of the key challenges in modern diplomacy, especially for smaller nations surrounded by larger powers.
Yes, and ASEAN countries have become experts at balancing. Take Vietnam, for example. Vietnam has a complex relationship with China. They share cultural and historical ties, but they also have disputes in the South China Sea. Vietnam often welcomes US military cooperation as a way to balance Chinese influence. However, it also maintains strong trade relations with Beijing. It's like walking on a tightrope. Every move must be careful. Too close to one side, and the other may feel threatened. Too distant, and economic opportunities could disappear.
That's a perfect example, Julia. Another interesting case is Indonesia. As the largest economy in Southeast Asia, Indonesia often plays a central role in regional diplomacy. It tries to stay neutral and promote dialogue rather than confrontation. Indonesian leaders often talk about maintaining ASEAN unity. This means that ASEAN countries should make decisions together, not under pressure from any big power. It's a smart approach. It allows Indonesia to stay friendly with both the US and China while still leading regional discussions.
The Philippines is another country that faces similar challenges. Under different presidents, its foreign policy has shifted between closer ties with China and stronger relations with the US. When disputes arise in the South China Sea, the Philippines sometimes turns to international law and alliances with Washington. But when trade and infrastructure are the priority, it often engages warmly with Beijing. This flexible approach is also a type of negotiation strategy, where a country adjusts its policy depending on what benefits its people most at the time.
For our English learners, this is a great moment to learn 3 important words: diplomacy, negotiation, and policy balance. Let's define them clearly. Diplomacy means the way countries communicate and manage their relationships. It's like a peaceful tool for solving problems without using force. Negotiation means discussion between 2 or more sides to reach an agreement. It's used not only in politics, but also in business and daily life. Policy balance means making careful decisions that keep relationships with multiple sides stable and positive. All 3 of these concepts are essential for understanding how ASEAN countries behave in today's world.
Beautifully explained, Adam. And these words are not just political, they're practical. When you talk with friends, work with colleagues, or even plan a group project, you use the same skills: diplomacy, negotiation, and balance. You must express your views clearly, listen carefully, and find common ground. This is exactly what ASEAN countries do when they face pressure from both Washington and Beijing.
And the truth is, no country in Southeast Asia wants to choose sides completely. Most of them believe their strength comes from diversity and cooperation. ASEAN's official motto, "One vision, one identity, one community," shows that these nations want unity, not division. Still, unity is easier said than done. Each country has its own history, economy, and political needs. Some rely on Chinese factories and loans. Others depend on American security support. That's why every summit becomes a delicate performance. Every word, handshake, and smile carries deep meaning.
Yes, diplomacy is a performance of peace. And after Trump's visit, Chinese leaders began visiting ASEAN capitals more actively. They signed new agreements, promised more investments, and spoke about shared destiny. It was China's way of responding not through confrontation, but through engagement. This is another important lesson for learners. In diplomacy, actions speak louder than words. When a country builds roads, ports, or railways in another nation, it's not only an economic act, it's a political signal of friendship and influence.
That's very true, Julia. And we can also see how the language of diplomacy shapes public opinion. Chinese state media used soft, optimistic vocabulary: peaceful development, win-win, shared prosperity. The US, on the other hand, continued to emphasize security, freedom, and transparency. These word choices tell us a lot about each country's priorities. America focuses on independence and openness, while China focuses on harmony and development. Understanding these word patterns helps learners not just improve their English, but also interpret global politics more deeply.
That's a great educational point, Adam. For anyone learning English for international relations, it's essential to pay attention not only to vocabulary, but also to tone. In political communication, tone can completely change the meaning of a sentence. Saying "we are concerned" in a diplomatic meeting actually means "we disagree." Saying "we welcome further discussions" might mean we haven't decided yet. Learning this kind of hidden meaning, what we call diplomatic language, helps you sound more professional and globally aware.
Exactly. The ASEAN Summit became a stage where both the US and China used their diplomatic skills to shape global perception. While Trump's approach was bold and assertive, China's response was calm and patient. The regional reactions showed that ASEAN countries prefer stability over tension. They want trade, peace, and prosperity, not rivalry. For them, the ideal future is one where both powers coexist and contribute to growth instead of competing for control.
That's what makes Southeast Asia such an interesting part of the world. It's not only geographically in the middle between East and West, but also politically and economically balanced between two global giants. And for English learners, studying this region gives valuable lessons in how to communicate, cooperate, and compromise. The art of diplomacy isn't just for presidents and ambassadors. It's a life skill we can all practice.
Well said, Julia. As we move forward in this podcast series, we'll continue exploring how language, politics, and international strategy connect. In our next section, we'll look at how the global media covered Trump's appearance and China's reaction, how headlines, interviews, and editorials shaped public understanding across the world.
So, stay tuned, everyone. This journey is not just about politics. It's about communication, culture, and the power of words. If you're enjoying this story, remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the English Globe. Share your thoughts. If you were an ASEAN leader, how would you balance between the US and China? We'd love to hear your diplomatic opinion. Diplomacy, at its heart, is all about communication. It's about how leaders choose their words, how they express their positions, and how they build understanding even when their interests are different. Every sentence a leader says in an international meeting is carefully prepared, reviewed, and polished. Words in diplomacy are never random. They are designed to show respect, express strength, and avoid unnecessary conflict. At the ASEAN Summit, President Trump's tone may have sounded strong, but it was still diplomatic in structure. He didn't threaten. He challenged, he didn't insult, he demanded fairness. That difference matters deeply in the world of international relations.
Yes, Julia, and that difference between strong language and aggressive language is something every English learner should study. In diplomacy, it's not only what you say, it's how you say it. For example, when a leader says, "We will not tolerate unfair practices," it sounds firm but official. If they said, "We are angry about this situation," it would sound emotional and unprofessional. Diplomacy avoids emotion and focuses on structure. This skill, expressing firm ideas respectfully, is not only used by presidents, it's valuable for students, teachers, business people, and anyone who communicates across cultures.
That's very true. In English, there's a beautiful concept called polite disagreement. It means disagreeing with someone clearly, but without damaging the relationship. For example, instead of saying, "You are wrong," a diplomat might say, "We see this issue differently." Instead of saying, "We will not do that," they might say, "We will consider alternative approaches." The meaning is the same. They disagree, but the tone is more respectful. This kind of language helps to keep communication open, even in conflict.
Exactly. And in Trump's case, while his tone was direct and often controversial, his advisors and speechwriters made sure that the official language of his statements remained diplomatic. For instance, he often said phrases like, "We encourage fair competition," or "We urge all nations to act responsibly." These are examples of diplomatic expressions. They sound polite, but they carry strong meaning. We encourage can sometimes mean we expect. We urge can mean we demand. The art of diplomacy is to express firmness without aggression.
That's what makes diplomatic English so fascinating, Adam. It's a blend of politeness, clarity, and strategy. Even small words like may, could, or should can change the entire tone of a message. For example, we could consider further steps sounds softer than we will take further steps. The first one leaves space for discussion, while the second one closes the door. That's why in political communication, tone and structure are just as important as content.
Exactly, Julia. For our English learners, let's look at some useful phrases that are often used in international diplomacy. These are called soft power phrases. They help leaders sound confident but not confrontational. Here are a few. We are open to dialogue, meaning we're willing to talk. We welcome further discussion, meaning we haven't agreed yet, but we want to keep communicating. We recognize the challenges, meaning we understand there is a problem, but we're not ready to take a side. We remain committed to cooperation, meaning we will continue working together, even if there are differences. We hope to find a mutually beneficial solution, meaning we want an outcome that benefits both sides. These phrases may sound simple, but they carry deep strategic meaning.
And that's exactly why diplomacy is often described as the art of saying everything without saying too much. Leaders choose words that sound positive and balanced, even when the situation is tense. During the ASEAN Summit, when Trump talked about unfair trade, he avoided directly naming countries in his first statement. It was a diplomatic technique. He made his point but allowed flexibility for future discussion. Later, when he referred to those who manipulate markets, it became clear who he meant. But the message remained official and not personal.
That's the genius of diplomatic language. It keeps doors open. Once you use emotional or aggressive words, communication becomes harder. That's why international meetings often take months of preparation. Teams of diplomats, translators, and policy advisors work behind the scenes to make sure every word is precise. Even the order of words in a sentence can matter. For example, saying, "We respect China's role in regional stability" is more diplomatic than saying, "China must maintain regional stability." One sounds cooperative, the other sounds demanding.
It's also important to understand how tone can change the power of a message. In English, tone is not just about voice. It's about rhythm, stress, and word choice. For instance, when a leader says, "We hope for continued peace," the word hope shows optimism. But if they say, "We expect continued peace," the tone changes. It becomes a polite warning. Diplomats master this skill because the same sentence can sound friendly or threatening, depending on the tone.
That's such a great point. Let's also discuss non-verbal diplomacy, how communication extends beyond words. Leaders use facial expressions, gestures, and even seating arrangements to send messages. For example, a handshake can represent peace, but the length of the handshake or who initiates it can reflect power. At the ASEAN Summit, every handshake between Trump and Asian leaders was carefully watched by the media. The firmness, the smile, even the direction of the body, these small details are part of diplomatic communication.
Exactly. Diplomacy is communication in its most refined form. It's about balance, being firm but friendly, confident but cooperative. When Trump spoke about fair trade and freedom of navigation, his words sounded strong, but his team ensured that the sentences stayed within diplomatic limits. He expressed disagreement with China's trade policies, yet he also mentioned partnership, security, and future cooperation. That's a perfect example of strategic communication, making a bold statement while maintaining international decorum.
And that idea, Julia, strategic communication, is so valuable for English learners. It's about planning your message carefully before you speak. Whether you are giving a presentation, applying for a job, or negotiating a business deal, you can use these same techniques. Be clear, polite, and purposeful. Use words like appreciate, understand, consider, and recommend. These verbs make your language professional and respectful. They turn simple sentences into elegant communication.
Yes, and that's why language learning and diplomacy are so closely connected. Both are about connecting people, building bridges, and showing respect. In today's world, where misunderstandings can grow quickly, communication becomes the most powerful form of soft power. And for English learners, understanding how world leaders use this power helps develop not only language skills, but also cultural intelligence.
Cultural intelligence. That's an excellent phrase, Julia. It means understanding different communication styles, values, and expectations across cultures. For example, in Western diplomacy, being direct is often seen as honest and efficient. But in Asian diplomacy, being indirect can be a sign of respect and wisdom. When Trump speaks directly, some countries may see strength, others may see aggression. When Chinese diplomats speak indirectly, some may see calmness, others may see avoidance. So the same style can mean different things depending on the culture.
Exactly. And that's why learning about diplomacy through English is such a powerful educational experience. It teaches us not only vocabulary, but also empathy. It shows us how to listen before we respond and how to choose our words wisely. Every good diplomat and every good communicator knows that words can build trust or destroy it. The key is balance. Say enough to make your point, but not so much that you close the door.
And that's what makes this topic so relevant to English learners worldwide. Whether you're speaking to classmates, colleagues, or international friends, remember that communication is your soft power. Be thoughtful, be respectful, and be precise. These are not just political lessons, they're life lessons. Diplomacy begins not in the meeting rooms of global leaders, but in our daily conversations, when we choose patience over anger and understanding over argument.
Beautifully said, Adam. So, dear listeners, as you continue improving your English, pay attention to diplomatic expressions and polite structures. Try using them in your conversations. Instead of saying, I don't agree, try saying, I see your point, but I have a different view. Instead of saying, you're wrong, say, that's an interesting perspective. Small changes like these can make your communications sound more professional and more global.
Exactly. And as we've seen at the ASEAN Summit, the way leaders speak reflects their nation's identities and ambitions. Trump's words were firm, China's words were measured, and ASEAN's words were cooperative. All these styles represent different kinds of diplomacy: hard power, soft power, and collective diplomacy. Understanding them gives us a deeper appreciation for how communication shapes history.
That's such a great way to put it. So, to all our English Globe listeners, keep practicing your language, listen carefully to how world leaders speak, and learn how tone and word choice can express confidence and respect at the same time. Communication is not just about grammar or vocabulary. It's about emotion, intelligence, and humanity.
Absolutely, Julia. In our next section, we'll explore how these diplomatic messages continue to influence international relations long after the summit, how statements made in one meeting can reshape alliances, trade, and trust. But for now, let's reflect on one simple truth. Words are the most powerful tools of peace. Use them wisely, and you can influence not only conversations, but the world itself.
In this section, we turn our attention to ASEAN's overall position in the ongoing power competition between the United States and China. ASEAN, which stands for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, includes 10 member countries such as Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. These nations have built their cooperation on the key principle of neutrality and non-interference in each other's internal affairs. This principle means that no country should interfere with the domestic policies of another. It has been at the heart of ASEAN's identity for decades, allowing the organization to maintain peace and stability in a region that is home to over 650 million people.
That's right, Julia. Neutrality doesn't mean silence or indifference. It means ASEAN countries try to maintain balanced relationships with both powers, the United States and China. They understand that both nations bring benefits and challenges. For example, China is ASEAN's largest trading partner, offering huge economic opportunities through trade and investment. On the other hand, the U.S. provides security partnerships, educational exchanges, and a long-standing military presence in the Pacific. ASEAN nations know that choosing one side completely could risk losing the other's advantages, so their diplomatic skill lies in balance.
Exactly, Adam. This balance is what we call strategic neutrality. ASEAN's goal is not to take sides, but to promote peace and regional stability through dialogue and cooperation. This is especially important because many ASEAN countries rely on China for trade and on the US for security support. For example, Vietnam often works closely with the US on defense issues, but it also has strong economic relations with China. Similarly, Singapore hosts American military forces but continues to maintain deep business connections with Beijing. This shows how ASEAN countries try to stay friendly with both powers without becoming too dependent on one.
And this approach connects to ASEAN's long-standing policy called the ASEAN Way. The ASEAN Way emphasizes respect, consensus, and non-confrontation. Instead of taking hard stances or public criticisms, member countries prefer private discussions and mutual understanding. For English learners, the word consensus is important here. It means a general agreement among all members. ASEAN rarely makes decisions by voting or majority rule. Instead, they try to reach a decision that everyone can accept. This process may take time, but it helps maintain unity among very different nations.
Yes, and that unity is what gives ASEAN influence on the global stage. Even though ASEAN countries are not as powerful individually, together they form one of the world's largest economic regions. They often speak with a collective voice, especially on trade, environment, and security issues. For example, when tensions rise in the South China Sea, ASEAN calls for dialogue and peaceful negotiation instead of conflict. Their message to both Washington and Beijing is simple. The region's prosperity depends on cooperation, not confrontation. This principle helps ASEAN to be seen as a peacekeeper and a bridge between competing powers.
That's a key point, Julia. Another concept that English learners should understand here is non-interference. This term means that no member country tries to control or criticize another's internal affairs. For example, ASEAN avoids making strong statements about a member's domestic politics or governance. While this sometimes limits how far ASEAN can go in solving regional problems, it also prevents unnecessary conflicts between neighbors. This principle has kept the organization united for more than 50 years. It's a unique form of diplomacy based on respect and patience rather than power and pressure.
True, and it's also worth noting how ASEAN manages its relationship with both the US and China through what's called inclusive diplomacy. This means inviting both powers to participate in regional forums rather than excluding one. For instance, the ASEAN Regional Forum and the East Asia Summit include leaders from the US, China, Japan, India, and many others. By doing this, ASEAN positions itself as a central platform for dialogue, a kind of neutral meeting ground where everyone can talk, share concerns, and avoid escalation. This helps ASEAN maintain a peaceful environment while also strengthening its own relevance.
And that's why ASEAN's neutrality is not weakness, it's strategy. Neutrality allows smaller nations to survive and even thrive between two giants. In international relations, this is often called hedging, which means maintaining flexibility to work with both sides depending on the situation. Hedging protects a country's interests without locking it into one alliance. It's like keeping multiple doors open so that you can walk through whichever one benefits you most at a given time. Many ASEAN leaders have mastered this art of balancing diplomacy, which makes their foreign policy both smart and stable.
I think this idea of balance also teaches us something important about communication and problem-solving in daily life. Just as ASEAN avoids confrontation by choosing careful words and listening to all sides, we too can practice diplomatic communication in our personal and professional lives. It's not always about winning an argument. Sometimes it's about finding common ground. This is a valuable English lesson as well. Understanding how tone, politeness, and patience can help achieve better outcomes in any discussion.
That's a wonderful observation, Julia. For English learners, listening to how international leaders communicate at summits like ASEAN can be an excellent way to develop advanced listening and speaking skills. The words used are often formal, respectful, and carefully chosen. Expressions like, "We encourage dialogue," "We value cooperation," or "We seek mutual understanding" are typical in diplomatic conversations. These are good examples of how to express strong ideas without sounding aggressive.
Exactly, Adam. And as ASEAN continues to play a key role in maintaining peace and cooperation in Asia, its principle of neutrality will remain essential. The world may see changes in power dynamics between the US and China, but ASEAN's steady approach reminds everyone that stability often comes from dialogue, not division. For English learners and global citizens, this offers both a language lesson and a life lesson. That communication, respect, and balance are the true foundations of peace.
Well said, Julia. ASEAN's example shows that even smaller voices can make a big difference when they speak with unity and purpose. Their approach reminds us that cooperation doesn't mean weakness, it means wisdom. In a world of competition, ASEAN continues to show the power of peaceful engagement, proving that neutrality, when practiced wisely, can be one of the strongest diplomatic tools of all.
As we move toward the final part of today's discussion, it's time to ask the central question. Is Trump's challenge to China at the ASEAN Summit truly a turning point in Asia? Or is it simply another chapter in the ongoing story of global competition? This question is important because international politics often looks dramatic on the surface, but real changes take time to unfold. A single speech, meeting, or policy announcement may seem powerful in the moment, but whether it truly changes the balance of power depends on how nations react and adapt in the long term.
That's a great question, Julia. To understand whether this event marks a turning point, we should first define what that means in the context of international relations. A turning point is a critical moment that leads to lasting transformation in diplomacy, trade, or security. It's when policies shift direction, alliances change shape, or regional priorities are redefined. For instance, the creation of ASEAN itself in 1967 was a turning point for Southeast Asia because it united nations that had once been divided by colonial history and conflict. Similarly, China's economic reforms in the late 1970s were a turning point that changed its role from isolation to global leadership. So the question now is, does Trump's challenge represent such a lasting shift?
Many political observers believe that Trump's firm words at the ASEAN Summit reflected a growing US determination to push back against China's regional influence. During his administration, we saw a clear strategy of economic containment, using tariffs, sanctions, and alliances to limit China's dominance in technology, trade, and the South China Sea. However, some experts argue that this was not a completely new approach. The US has been cautious about China's rise for many years, even before Trump. What changed was the tone. The language became more direct, less diplomatic, and more public. For English learners, this highlights the difference between policy change and policy communication. Sometimes leaders say old things in new ways to send stronger signals.
Exactly, Julia. And if we analyze the data and expert opinions, we can see mixed signs. On one hand, Trump's presence at the ASEAN Summit drew significant attention to issues like trade imbalance, intellectual property, and freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. It encouraged some ASEAN countries to reconsider their economic dependence on China. For example, nations like Vietnam and Malaysia began exploring stronger trade ties with the US and Japan, showing that they wanted options beyond Beijing's influence. But on the other hand, China did not retreat. Instead, it deepened its regional engagement through the Belt and Road Initiative and investments in infrastructure, ports, and digital networks across Asia.
That's right. So, in many ways, Trump's challenge did not mark a complete turning point, but rather intensified the existing competition between the two superpowers. The word intensified is important for our English learners. It means to make something stronger or more extreme. The rivalry between the US and China had already been growing, but Trump's strong approach brought it into the spotlight. What followed were years of trade disputes, mutual tariffs, and diplomatic standoffs. Yet, even after those tense moments, both sides remained essential to each other economically. This shows that in global politics, confrontation and cooperation can happen at the same time.
Yes, and this mix of conflict and cooperation is what we often call complex interdependence. It's a key term in international relations. It means that even when countries compete politically or militarily, they still depend on each other economically and socially. The US and China are perfect examples. Their economies are deeply linked through trade, technology, and finance. So, while Trump's challenge may have been strong in tone, it couldn't completely separate the two powers. Instead, it pushed them into a new phase, one defined by competition for influence rather than open confrontation.
Let's also consider the ASEAN perspective. For Southeast Asian nations, this summit may not have been a turning point in favor of one side, but it was a reminder of their importance in global affairs. The presence of major powers at ASEAN events shows that the region's stability matters to the whole world. ASEAN's neutral stance allows it to benefit from both sides, receiving investment from China and strategic support from the United States. This situation teaches us a useful English expression: walking a tightrope. It means trying to balance carefully between two risky choices. That's exactly what ASEAN nations are doing, balancing between friendship with both powers while avoiding being pulled too far in either direction.
That's a perfect description, Julia. From a broader view, the 21st century is witnessing a gradual shift in the global order. Power is no longer concentrated in one country. It's distributed across regions like Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. In this context, the ASEAN Summit may be remembered as one of many moments when Asia asserted its central role in shaping world politics. However, it's too early to call it a turning point. Long-term changes depend on what happens next, whether future U.S. administrations continue Trump's tough approach, whether China adjusts its regional strategy, and how ASEAN strengthens its internal unity.
For English learners, this part of our discussion introduces several valuable academic terms: turning point, strategic competition, interdependence, regional stability, and diplomatic tone. Understanding these concepts helps you not only follow global news, but also analyze it critically. When you read articles or listen to political speeches, you can look for signals of change. Phrases like new direction, policy shift, or emerging alliance. These are often clues that something important is happening in diplomacy.
Exactly, and another useful word is continuity. It means something that stays the same over time. In politics, continuity is as important as change. While Trump's statements seemed bold, many aspects of U.S. policy in Asia, like supporting allies, protecting sea routes, and promoting free trade, have been consistent for decades. This shows that some things evolve slowly, even when leaders change. Understanding this helps learners see that world politics is not just about moments, but about patterns.
So, to answer our main question, was this a turning point or just another summit? The honest answer is, perhaps a bit of both. It was a turning point in tone, communication, and visibility. The US made its stance clearer than before. But in terms of long-term structure, the region's balance of power remains largely the same. The real turning point may come later, depending on how both sides act and how ASEAN continues to manage its delicate neutrality.
Well summarized, Julia. What we can say for sure is that the ASEAN Summit highlighted the growing importance of Asia in global affairs. Whether through confrontation or cooperation, Asia is no longer just a stage. It's a key player shaping the future world order. For English learners, understanding this dynamic not only builds vocabulary and critical thinking, but also deepens cultural awareness. Because learning a language is not just about words, it's about understanding the world those words describe.
Exactly, Adam. And that's why discussions like this one are valuable. They connect language learning with real global issues. As we move into our conclusion, we'll reflect on how these international developments teach us lessons not only about politics, but also about communication, cooperation, and the power of understanding others' perspectives. All essential skills for anyone learning English in today's interconnected world. As we reach the final part of today's podcast, it's time to reflect on the key lessons from our discussion. We've explored Trump's challenge to China at the ASEAN Summit, China's response, and ASEAN's careful balancing act. For English learners, the most important takeaway is not just understanding politics, but understanding how to observe world events neutrally. By looking at facts, statements, and actions without rushing to judgment, you can develop a clearer perspective on international relations. This approach also helps improve your critical thinking skills, which are essential in both language learning and global awareness.
Exactly, Julia. Neutral observation is a powerful tool. It allows learners to study vocabulary, sentence structures, and communication styles used by global leaders without being distracted by bias or emotion. Listening carefully to how leaders express disagreement, cooperation, or negotiation gives us practical English lessons. Words like diplomacy, negotiation, policy balance, interdependence, and strategic communication are not just academic terms. They are real tools that help us understand and discuss the world intelligently.
Another key lesson is the importance of understanding global communication styles. As we've seen, American leaders often speak directly and assertively, while Chinese leaders tend to use measured and indirect language. ASEAN countries practice strategic neutrality and cooperative dialogue. By studying these communication styles, English learners can improve not only their vocabulary, but also their cultural intelligence, the ability to understand and adapt to different communication norms. This skill is essential for effective global interaction, whether in politics, business, or everyday conversations.
Yes, and learning about these international interactions also teaches us the value of balance and cooperation. Just as ASEAN countries carefully balance relationships with the US and China, English learners can balance multiple skills, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, to become more confident and competent. Observing world events in context helps learners appreciate how nations communicate, negotiate, and collaborate, which is directly applicable to personal and professional communication in English.
Exactly, Adam. One of the most inspiring lessons from today is that global awareness and language learning go hand in hand. By paying attention to international affairs, learners can practice new vocabulary, understand complex sentence structures, and see real-world examples of diplomatic language. For instance, phrases like, "We encourage dialogue," "We remain committed to cooperation," or "We seek mutually beneficial solutions" are excellent examples of professional English that learners can adopt in their own communication.
Absolutely. And we should remember that learning English is not just about grammar or vocabulary. It's about connecting with the world. By following global events, analyzing communication styles, and observing diplomacy in action, learners develop not only language skills, but also critical thinking and cross-cultural awareness. These abilities will help them succeed academically, professionally, and socially in our interconnected world.
So, dear listeners, the final message we want to share is this: keep learning, stay curious, and observe the world with an open mind. Every news article you read, every podcast you listen to, and every discussion you have in English is an opportunity to expand your understanding. Whether it's international politics, economic developments, or cultural exchanges, approaching these topics in English will strengthen both your language and your global perspective.
Exactly, Julia. Remember, language is a bridge, a way to connect ideas, people, and nations. By learning English through current events and real-world examples, you are building skills that go beyond words. You are developing the ability to think critically, communicate respectfully, and understand the complexity of our global society.
So, to all our listeners at the English Globe, keep practicing your English, stay informed about world affairs, and never stop exploring. Every step you take in learning a new word, understanding a sentence, or analyzing a statement brings you closer to becoming not only a skilled English speaker, but also a thoughtful global citizen.
That's right. The world is full of knowledge, opportunity, and inspiration. Approach it with curiosity and patience, and you'll see that learning English is more than a language skill. It's a way to engage meaningfully with the world around you. Thank you for listening. And remember, every sentence you practice, every word you learn, and every discussion you follow in English brings you one step closer to understanding and connecting with the world.
Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us today. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep speaking English. The journey is long, but every effort counts. Stay motivated, stay informed, and stay curious.
We hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the English Globe. Share your thoughts, your opinions, and your experiences. Where are you listening from? How do you see the future of global diplomacy? We'd love to hear from you.
Until next time, keep learning, keep observing, and remember, language is your gateway to understanding the world.
Goodbye for now, and keep exploring the English language and the global world together.